Hello and welcome to my review of Goodbye California, a 1977 novel from the author of Ice Station Zebra, Where Eagles Dare, and HMS Ulysses, to name just a few. Alistair Maclean. Goodbye California introduces Sergeant Ryder, a maverick cop who does things his own way and respects nobody. Well, apart from maybe his wife Susan and his son, California Highway Patrolman Jeff. Let's get into the plot, and you can use the slide or the chapters in the description to skip this section if you wish, but none of this review should be considered spoiler-free. The story begins with a break-in and theft from a nuclear power plant. A mix of uranium and plutonium is stolen and hostages are taken. Hostages that include a certain Susan Ryder, as well as a couple of eminent nuclear physicists. Ryder is keen to investigate the crime, and a natural choice for it if it wasn't for two things: his wife being one of the hostages, and his boss, Chief Donahue, being a corrupt, petty arse. Donahue assigns two other officers to the case, and Ryder tends his resignation, planning to investigate personally with Jeff, who also resigns. They head to the power plant and discover that Susan has left a message for him, scribbled in shorthand during her abduction. It gives a few details of the intruders, but not enough to contribute much of a lead by itself. Learning that stealing nuclear fuel is surprisingly easy, Ryder wonders why a group so organised has made the job hard for themselves. Meanwhile, the hostages are taken to a mountaintop fortress and treated rather well if it wasn't for the fact they're being held against their will. They discover that two other nuclear physicists are also being held. The bad guy in question is Morrow from the unemotional, gentlemanly school of evil bad guys. He intends to set off a nuclear weapon in the California area. Ryder and the others worry about the possibility of earthquakes being triggered by the blast and do a little digging in that area. But Ryder decides a crime of this scale can't have been pulled off without the chief's involvement, and he already has a dossier on his corruption and other wrongdoings. After beating a confession from him, but not of involvement in the theft, the chief's behaviour implicates a local judge. Ryder beats a confession out of him too. Then, after following up a few red herrings, goes back for some more, uncovering the judge's involvement on the fringes of a plot, but Morrow is too smart to allow himself to be implicated by a Weasley figure like the judge, so that investigation runs out of steam. Morrow detonates a bomb in Nevada, proving his nuclear capabilities, verified by his hostages, and he announces to the world that he will set off another bomb off the coast of LA to cause a tidal wave, and thereafter set off a further 10 bombs if certain demands related to the Cold War are not met. However, Ryder has seen and heard enough from Morrow's press releases to begin to put things together. He correctly supposes that Morrow is implicating the Russians in his plot as another red herring, and is in fact a Muslim terrorist working against the US-backed Philippine government that he feels are oppressing Muslim separatists. Ryder also works out that their true goal is extortion in order to arm the separatists because their Russian arms pipeline has gone cold. The president offers to negotiate in person, and this is a little silly. Ryder arranges Hollywood makeup artists to disguise a team of look-alike actors, criminals, and Ryder himself as the president and his top aides. They smuggle guns in the bodysuit of an actor disguised as the fattest cabinet member and are welcomed into Morrow's lair. After a very brief firefight, the plot and the story is over. As stories go, Goodbye California is fairly middling, certainly not among Maclean's best, despite the assertions of the Sunday Times. I think I've read 6 or 7 of Maclean's books, and this feels pretty standard. Decent enough, but not as gripping as it might have been. There is a substantial section at the start with earthquake specialist Alec Benson briefing Ryder and co on the various quakes that have hit California over the years. That is repeated unnecessarily towards the end, almost word for word. A strange choice because the lubrication potholes Benson's team have drilled, hoping to alleviate earthquakes, would make good sites for Morrow's bombs. But it is clear by the second time of asking that Ryder believes Morrow actually has an alternative plan, one he keeps from the reader as he does Jeff's harebrained scheme to get to Morrow. That said, Maclean had already written upwards of 20 books of this kind, so he knows the ins and outs of a thriller and can up the pace where required, which he does towards the end, where lengthy scenes of exposition are almost reduced to scenes scraping just a handful of lines. It's a little cynical, but sufficiently effective that 40-ish years later, it's the standard for thriller writers. What is disappointing about it is that the red herring of bombing the boreholes, when revealed, is revealed too late to really crank up any tension and is dismissed by an authorial meh. That didn't seem to matter at all. I'm pretty sure that Maclean, on the top of his form, would have used that more effectively. While it is commendable that Susan Ryder is no damsel and convinces as the sort of partner that could tolerate Ryder and be tolerated in return, that Morrow doesn't attempt to utilise her to fend off her husband's investigation, despite his considerable reputation. It would be more excusable if he didn't know who she was, but he says he does. The presence of Ryder's daughter, Peggy, is completely unnecessary. After her kidnapping, Jeff asks, why get at you through Peggy, when Morrow does absolutely nothing with her or Susan? While such patchwork teams are a little cliche now, I think the better story here would have revolved around the team put together for the attack on Morrow's hideout. The murderer on the team has an interesting backstory that I'd really like to have seen explored a great deal more, especially if it meant I didn't have to read the same list of earthquakes twice. What is particularly telling about that is that neither nuclear weapon actually sets off an earthquake. It feels rather like Maclean did a lot of research, but then his story went in another direction and he felt he had to use it anyway. Once is enough. The final shootout is over in a handful of words, and more modern authors in this field, Lee Child for example, would not waste the presence of a man-mountain like Dubois so casually. To do so seems a waste. Although written a little too early for such things, there is a touch of the Indiana Jones about it, but sadly without the same level of elan. Ryder lifted his Kalashnikov and Dubois died. In a charitable mood, this seems perfectly in keeping with Ryder's no-thrills attitude, but in a less generous one, it's lazy and rubbish. Morrow's demise might also feel a touch unsatisfactory after menacing and chewing up California for the better part of 250 pages. He switched the Kalashnikov slide from single shot to automatic. Yes, that's all you get, ellipsis included, but I don't mind this one too much. Once Ryder is armed and inside the compound, the game is up anyway, so perhaps it's better to just get it over with. The ellipsis rather underlines, that no-thrills attitude again, and Ryder exudes that throughout. It's a fitting end for him, if perhaps not for the man on the other end of the gun. Overall, though, the story does hold the interest largely because Morrow and Ryder have a similar calm that's handled in different ways, and that makes them good foils. It really helps. By far the strongest part of the story, Ryder is clearly a character Maclean enjoyed writing. His open disrespect of the head of the CIA and the amused reaction of the head of the FBI is a fun scene. His destruction of the corrupt judge, however, earns admiration from his peers because it comes without any violence. Unlike his first visit, his casual brutality, backed with a calculating mind, seems like the proto-Reacher. It's a shame the investigation consists of returning to the same person and then making a deduction out of some very slender leads. If he is the inspiration for Child's hero, solving the case out of thin air in front of a disbelieving audience sets his own inspiration rather further back in the literary canon. The clever investigator overlooks the obvious. Me? I'm stupid. I'd go for the obvious. Ryder then is the self-deprecating Holmes, though one rather keener on pistol whipping his suspects. The one slight downside to this is that when Ryder roughs up the chief of police in his own home inside the first couple of chapters, it builds an air of invincibility. Solving the plot becomes immediately inevitable. Regardless, Maclean's enjoyment in crafting the character translates nicely from the page, elevating Goodbye California above its average plot. Maclean rather enjoyed himself with Goodbye California. Perhaps the scale of the potential doom involved tickled his fancy, because his lengthy description of the qualities of eccentrics seems almost like it has a touch of the Pratchett's about it. Perhaps that's just another author he inspired to pick up a pen. The wry observation that to hope to be a successful eccentric in California, one has to be a millionaire. Being a billionaire brings with it a cast-iron guarantee, hardly scratches the surface of a curiously light-hearted introduction to the novel's villain and his lair. His description of the chaos the population of LA causes to themselves in their flight from Morrow's nuclear threat is related in a similar style of mocking seriousness. Maclean also seems to be stretching himself beyond what might be called his comfort zone, and at times seems positively wordy. He sounded genuinely unaware of his incredibly mendacious effrontery. The tidal wave that strikes Los Angeles is interspersed with the commentary of a reporter Maclean calls babbling, whom Morrow describes as a fool, and who describes his own joke as feeble. Describing the tsunami and its devastating landfall over a couple of pages, though, puts Maclean at odds with his own tone. Great torrents of water, perhaps 30 to 40 feet high, seething, bubbling white like giant maelstroms, bearing along on their tortured surfaces an infinity of unidentified debris rushed along the east-west canyons of Los Angeles. It's such a curious mix for an event with the extraordinary consequences for the world that it undermines the realism of the story, which surely is the point of a story double laden with so much earthquake material. Overall, though, the description of the wave is solid. The chaos the fleeing population causes is probably right on the money as well. It just doesn't quite gel together as well as it might. In conclusion, in my experience, Goodbye California is pretty much middle of the road for Maclean. Ryder is a huge character deserving of a stronger story than he gets here. The plot is in the solid 6 at a push 7 out of 10 range, not helped by too many red herrings and not enough investigation, which needs to be more than just returning to beat up the same guy to really show off Ryder's full potential. The danger with a character looming so large is that the conclusion becomes inevitable very early, and he or she can overshadow everyone else. Sadly, that is the case with Jeff, his son, who's a bit of a non-entity, chasing coattails until he proposes a ridiculous scheme that ends the story, and his daughter is a total irrelevance. Morrow, though, is an icy calm bad guy that plays nicely opposite Ryder, and while the two unemotional cold fish might be too many for some novels, it works here and contrasts well with the outrage of the scientists, who, to Maclean's credit, also have a nice amount of individuality about them, as does Ryder's wife. I can't help but feel, though, that the hastily cobbled together group of, dare I say, eccentrics that impersonate the president and his aides is a better group of characters to play off Ryder, especially the underused criminal genius Don, who might even have given him a run for his money. To introduce them so late is a shame. In anyone else's bibliography, Goodbye California would rank higher, but in Maclean's, the overall feeling is one of being decent but expecting more. Thanks for watching. Liking and subscribing is appreciated. If you ring the bell, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.